What's up everyone? Some of you may remember that I made a video back in April about Ori and the Will of the Wisps, and how it's my favorite game. Well, after that I started trying to actually get good at it, specifically speedrunning the short time trials that have built-in leaderboards so that I could compare my times against other players. And not long after that, I broke into the top 100 out of hundreds of thousands of players for 3 of those races, peaking with the 30th fastest time in the world for a race called Inkwater Marsh. Now, I'm usually not much of a completionist for most games, let alone a speedrunner, so I thought it might be kinda cool to break down that time trial and talk about how I approached learning how to really optimize a game like this from scratch. On screen right now is an average person's playthrough of the Inkwater Marsh time trial. You race down into this underground cavern, moving through the water and up to the second half of the course using a combination of grapples and bounce pads. It normally takes about 30 seconds and it tests a lot of different skills depending on how you approach the first half of the course. The second half gives less room for different pathing options because you generally have to follow the strategy that's set out for you by the game, but even there's a lot of little things you can do to move even faster. Now, for comparison, here's my personal best on this trial, with my inputs in the bottom right. You'll notice immediately that pretty much every part of this trial is being done faster. Even in areas where there's only one path to take, I'm still making minor optimizations. So let's talk about how I got to this time and the things I learned about the game along the way. Almost everything in this trial was self-taught, so hopefully it's cool to see how I thought about learning to speedrun this short time trial. Let's start from the beginning. When the race starts, you have to run forward until you fall into this pit, and then you swim to the right and you fly out of the water using a dash to keep moving through the course. Even that right there has a lot of room for optimization. For starters, when you dash in Ori, you can cancel it with a jump, and you can cancel your jumps with a dash. Anyone who's played Smash knows where this is going. You can do a dash and then cancel it into a jump and then cancel it into another dash if you're fast enough. This is especially relevant because there's a little lip that you'll run into if you just dash to the right, so you actually need to jump over it and then cancel the jump into a dash to keep moving. If done correctly, you'll dash straight into the ground and you'll have no unnecessary airtime that would slow you down. But if you cancel the jump too fast, then you'll bonk into the lip, and if you cancel it too slow, then you waste time coming down for the jump. So you really need to hit that perfect sweet spot of canceling the jump right after you've cleared the lip. As you get to the end of this runway, it starts to slope downwards into the pit. Similar to the lip earlier, the timing on how you transition from this ramp to the pit itself can be really touchy, and it changes your speed a lot. Basically, you want to time and space it so that your last dash off the ramp has you barely clearing the edge before you can immediately start the fast fall. Because the goal here is you want to get into the air as quickly as possible so you can start the fast fall. Ori builds momentum really quickly when you're falling through the air, so the earlier you can get in the air, even if you're going to have to drift further to the right eventually, the faster and the better you can start to abuse that fast falling mechanic. As you drift over to the right and you get close to the water, you can dive in and immediately start changing your momentum using Ori's burst movement. In the normal playthrough, we saw the player just fall into the water, swim over to the right, and then they jump out and grapple up to this blue patch before moving on. If you're fast enough, you can actually hit the water out of your dive and immediately loop around to come out of the other side without ever losing speed, which is way more efficient. The main thing that's important to get right here is the angle. Because when you're falling down, you don't actually want to drift all the way to the right, because you still need some room to make the U-turn in the water before you come out the other side. If you come out the water without having fully completed the U-turn, then you'll slam into the wall of thorns. If you do that correctly, once you get out of the water, you can either go to the grapple point at the top, or use this bounce pad to get through the gap and keep moving to the right. Both of these can be done very quickly with the use of some advanced tech. If you want to use the bounce pad, you could just jump out of the water and either drift over to the pad, or you could cut down on excess airtime by cancelling your momentum out of the water with a dash, like we did before. From there, you can just drift to the right and bounce over the thorns to get to the next section. The problem with this is twofold. First, it's not very consistent to get to that bounce pad without wasting time floating in the air. And second, it's pretty easy to mess up the dash over the thorns after you go off the bounce pad, either by dashing too early and hitting the thorns, or by going too late and bonking into the ceiling. Because of this, I ignore the bounce pad entirely, and I just grapple straight to the ceiling. Ori can actually cancel out of these grapples by using the jump. So once I've gotten high enough to clear the thorns, I hit jump and then immediately dash over them. The lower I do this dash, the better, because it lets me avoid unnecessary airtime. But again, there's that risk of going too soon and then cancelling before I get enough height to clear the thorns, which immediately kills the run. So this is inherently something where you're kind of looking for that perfect sweet spot again. Okay, now on to the complicated part. There are a bunch of ways to get from here to this bounce pad, which leads to the final and most straightforward part of the course. For starters, there's this huge wheel that you need to get around. You could grapple to it and go over it, or you could dive into and then out of the water to get underneath it. Once you get to the other side, there's this smaller wheel that you also have to get around. If you went high to get over the first wheel, you might just be able to fly over it and land on the bounce pad. But if not, then its height actually makes ambiguous what the best approach is. I decided pretty early on that going under the wheel and through the water would be better than going high. The biggest time waster in these time trials is dead air time. And there's a bunch of that when you need to jump from the wheel to this platform and then jump again to the bounce pad, and even more if you try to glide straight to the bounce pad without landing. Going through the water means that you keep your max speed and can effectively dash through the water even while changing directions. Because there's so much water to move through, you want to do two dash inputs. One to get into the water and start moving to the right, and the other to help you fly out and land on this platform. The timing and angle on both these dashes is important, as any mistake might mean bonking your head if you leave the water in the wrong way, or wasting time if you go too deep into the water and then it takes you longer to get out. Once you hit this platform, you have two options. You can either dash between the spikes and the little wheel, or you can hit the wheel and then dash off to the pad. Both are pretty fast if done correctly, and are more or less equally difficult in different ways. To avoid touching the wheel at all, you need to dash at a very specific height that can thread the needle between touching this hazard and hitting the wheel at all. If you try to use the wheel, you want to dash to it and then walk forward just a little bit so that you dash downwards onto the bounce pad. If you dash too early, then you'll just dash over the bounce pad instead of onto it, and if you dash too late, then you've wasted extra time walking on the wheel. So this requires precision as well, but has a little bit of flexibility to fix your mistakes if you catch them quickly enough and can reposition on the wheel. Because of that slightly larger margin of error, I generally use this method. From here, the run is a lot simpler, but it's still pretty technical. You bounce up to the second bounce pad, and then keep moving to the right to land on the upper level. The only variance here is that again, your goal is to avoid dead air time used by falling. So you want to interrupt the upward momentum from both bounce pads with dashes to the right, with the goal of landing directly on the next area without any excess time spent falling. But if you do it too fast, you'll just hit the spikes or the wall. So again, it's a fine line to walk. Once you get up to the top level, you dash to the right, grapple up, and then you dash back to the left. Here, ideally, you should be doing the dash, jump, dash canceling that I was talking about earlier. I don't because it hurts my hands, but this is pretty much the only notable tech in that part of the run. Pretty straightforward. And from here, there's a pretty clear path that the game wants you to follow. You're supposed to grapple to each of these blue flowers in order until you fall down onto the checkpoint and end the race. However, there's a couple ways to move faster. First, you could follow the grapple points as intended, and just move as quickly as possible from one flower to the next without any time wasted. By grappling to the next flower as soon as you have a clear line of sight, rather than waiting for your momentum from the last grapple to end, you can save a lot of time. However, by doing that, you're still spending a lot of time landing on and then jumping off of this wall in order to clear the thorns and get to the last grapple point. This is usually necessary because you can't get a vertical enough angle on this grapple point to go straight up and get the height needed to get to that last grapple point without using the wall for extra height. If you dash into these thorns, you can use the temporary invincibility gained after taking damage to immediately grapple afterwards, and you're going at a more vertical angle and will barely clear that corner, allowing you to grapple to the last point without needing to use the wall at all. And then there's one last trick at the end. Instead of just letting Ori fall down onto the checkpoint to end the race, you can actually grab onto and slide across the wall above the checkpoint, like so. If you do this, which requires completely changing your aerial drift from all the way to the right to get there faster, to now holding left to grab the wall, you can slide above the checkpoint, and it will register as if Ori had landed on the ground and will stop the timer. I literally discovered this on accident in the personal best run that hit top 30. So, since then I've spent some time replicating it, and I've realized that that's just how the timer works, but this is a huge time save that I quite literally discovered in-game under pressure, and if you can execute it correctly, it's really, really good. And that's it. That's the whole run. I've now spent 10 minutes talking about a 20-second speedrun of a game that most of the people who follow my channel do not play or pay attention to, but hopefully this was kind of interesting. I was almost done recording a very similar video on my top 100 time when I had a recording session for that video where I hit several back-to-back PBs, culminating in that top 30 time, so I had to redo a lot of this video to account for the things I learned in that PB. I then proceeded to beat my top 30 time again while recording this video and had to redo the second half for what is now the third time. So it's safe to say that this video has been in progress for a while. But I hope this is interesting. Like I mentioned with the dash cancels, there's still a lot of stuff in this run that I could push further and optimize to get beyond the time that I showed you here. But as you can see from the inputs in the bottom right, this game is pretty high APM, and they kind of hurt my hands to be grinding these same inputs over and over again in 20-second increments. So for the time being, I'm pretty content with this time that I have and the spot on the leaderboard that I have. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video.